In March 2001, 3 teams spread across England, United States and Canada joined forces to embark on developing a video game with the working title of Phoenix Rising. Eurocom, based in Derby, England, took the responsibility of developing the first-person perspective shooting engine, whilst California's Redwood Shores Studios, in partnership with Electronic Arts Vancouver of Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada, worked on the vehicle-based missions. A very famous British actor portrayed the main protagonist, whose face was scanned via a state-of-the-art laser scanning process. This used 250,000 individual data points and helped bring life to the character in a 3D space like we've never before seen. A very famous British car in which the protagonist drives, through the hard work of EA and the Need for Speed team, who were gearing up for Hot Pursuit 2, collaborated with the car manufacturer to capture all of the exact design specs, features and performance attributes. This also brought life to the car in the 3D space in similar fashion to that of its predecessor. The protagonist was Pierce Brosnan, starring as James Bond. The car was the Aston Martin V12 Vanquish. And the game was 007 Nightfire. What is known to fans more commonly as James Bond Nightfire is a first-person shooter that first landed on the shelves of North American shops on the 18th of November 2002 for the top-of-the-range GameCube and PlayStation 2. The Xbox and PC versions then hit America a day later, and by the 30th of January 2003, people from all corners were parachuting into a snowy Austria to infiltrate a secret meeting taking place in a hard-to-reach castle before speeding off into the night. Interestingly, thanks to JV Games, Nightfire was ported, changed in places and released to the Game Boy Advance 3 months later in March, and then to Mac via Aspyr Media in June 2004. But it's the original version on console that really captured mine and my brother's imagination and won our hearts over as 6 and 10 year olds. So much so that here I am, 20 years on, revisiting this classic. It wasn't just our imaginations that were captured, as by September 2003, just 10 months after the release, 5 million units were shifted across all platforms, with both the Xbox and PlayStation 2 versions achieving platinum status for selling a combined total of 2.4 million units. It didn't just sell well either, it played well too. IGN gave it a handsome but well-earned rating of 8.5 out of 10, and ratings even to this day by the general public score the game in the same ballpark. So what makes this game special? Well, the plot is simple enough, but that is the story arc of all Bond films. Bad guy has missiles, good guy tries to stop him. But as with any Bond film, it's how it's executed. When loading up the game for the first time, you're straight into the action, sniping out of a chopper to save one of your many women in Paris, 5 minutes before the fireworks are unloaded into the night sky to celebrate the new year. It's a great springboard to launch from, and you then land in a wintry Eastern Central Europe to covertly enter a castle to spy on a secret meeting that introduces you to the main villains and allies, one of which starred in the prequel, Agent Underfire, which is a nice touch. In fact, the whole plot leads on from Agent Underfire, which was released only a year prior. You can make it into the castle a couple of different ways, which speaks volumes to the thought and care that went into the level design. I still to this day remember my brother finding out the alternate way into the castle. The looks on our faces to our parents as kids must have been classic. You have to remember that back then, games were very much linear in design, largely due to what was technologically possible, but Nightfire really broke the mould and paved the path for future developers and gamers to walk down. From here, you spend the next 2 missions escaping Austria with Zoe Nightshade, one of the main characters from Agent Underfire, who you rescue from the castle. Firstly via snowmobile, she drives, you shoot. It's an explosive exit into the trees, and after shaking the pursuing forces in true Bond style, you survive the night in more typical Bond fashion.
Was this car here the whole?
Perhaps. But you looked like you needed the rest.
I don't recall getting much rest at all, James.
And then flee in the reacquainted Vanquish to rendezvous with Q. Whilst you are first in the seat of the Aston Martin in Paris, it's only relatively briefly. This mission dedicates itself to showing off the car and how it handles, and it's here where the craft of EA's Need for Speed team is evident. Even in the current times, the driving mechanics hold up and run smooth. Coupled that with the missiles and gadgets, and it's a great marriage and a fun time. The game really kicks on from here, and it's non-stop action as you are then transported from Austria to Japan to fight guards and ninjas. Well, one at least. Then into an office in Tokyo, which sees Bond parachuting off from, after getting his Sam Fisher on. I sure hope you got that reference. If not, then you just...
So uncivilized.
The sniper is then back in your hands as you land in the grounds of a nuclear power plant, and you then, of course, have to 360 no-scope your way into and out of to gain knowledge of the bad guy's intentions. Because the office building in Tokyo was too cool, you then go back there a second time to see what leaving through the front door like a normal person looks like.
Need a lift, Mr. Bond? Allura McCall, Australian intelligence, on loan to MI6.
That's normal, right? The game then sees you diving into the deep depths of the ocean, speeding off in an armoured van, flying in a turret-mounted plane, and then eventually escaping out of space. I mean, seriously, the only time before this I remember being in space in a video game was on an arcade machine. It's a proper James Bond experience, which draws inspiration from the films while still being unique. That is harder to pull off than many give thought to. Whilst the story is slightly on the shorter side, that is actually a compliment in a way, because if the story was mediocre, the general consensus wouldn't be that it needs to be longer. It's a story that is well told, therefore it's short because it leaves you wanting more. With the story taken care of, it's time to touch on the gameplay. This is the first game that I remember to feature a real actor. As a kid, playing as James Bond was cool enough, but as my favourite James Bond, well, that was just downright awesome. Nightfire doesn't let you forget that either. With every corner you round, you're either taking down enemies in true Bond style, or traversing the map using one of his many gadgets supplied by Q. Just look at this wide array of guns and gadgets to pick from. For a game released in 2002, this is impressive, and means the gameplay is kept fresh. This also allows for creativity, which you are rewarded with by Bond moves. Whilst first introducing the title previous, the Bond moves are no longer given to the player so easily. This time round, you have to earn them through taking alternate routes in levels, killing enemies through outside of the box thinking, and taking care of additional objectives such as cutting the communications of enemies, CCTV feeds, and laser systems so that you can go about being Bond whilst remaining undetected. The Bond moves are a win-win. The mappers and designers are grateful for them as it results in players exploring their creations in greater detail than without, and the players get to explore and be creative, which really captures the true essence of James Bond and adds to the playability. Speaking of playability, the more Bond moves you earn, the better your score is at the end of the missions. As you can see, opponents killed, accuracy, remaining health and speed also factor into your score, with a bonus given for the level of difficulty the mission was completed on. This ranges from Operative, Agent and 00 Agent, a stablemate of the series. Essentially easy, medium and hard. The AI become tougher, deadlier and more numerous the higher up the chain you go. The greater the score, the better the medal, thus the greater the rewards. Your score is capped at 1 million, with the best medal in the game being Platinum. The others are Bronze, Silver and Gold. It's also possible to complete a mission and not get a medal at all. I definitely haven't done that before. It goes to show though, before the days of locking content behind paywalls, a existed a time in gaming in which games were fleshed out and players were rewarded for their attention to detail, knowledge of the game and skill level. I could spend hours on this issue with the modern day era of games. However, in the interest of time, I'll move on and perhaps save this for another time. Whilst rummaging around for old games, I came across some old memory cards that me and my brother used to protect as if our lives depended on them. I found this of a save of mine from 2008, in which I was going for the all-elusive platinum on each mission. 11-year-old me was resilient. And this is from a save of mine only days ago, whereby I was playing more casually for the hit of nostalgia. The game doesn't just reward you with a clean looking save file though, as on a separate screen, the medal achieved dictates the rewards you receive. These range from different playable characters from previous films such as Jaws and Oddjob, gadgets and maps all to be used in multiplayer. This integration meant the hard work in single player paid dividends whenever me and my brother decided to plug in the second controller. This allowed for some epic encounters, some of which we both still talk about to this day. More on that later. While some of these characters featured in previous Bond games such as the fan favourite GoldenEye, that was slightly before my time, as were the many more forgettable entries in the franchise in the period of uncertainty after then and before Agent Underfire. Also, thanks to the advancements in computing power that the consoles brought, Nightfire executed this in a more convincing and realistic way. I have mentioned Agent Underfire a few times, not just because Nightfire builds on its foundation as its sequel, but because it was the first Bond game I played, and it reminds me of simpler times. Games have a great ability to do that. Sadly, Underfire didn't feature a past or present Bond. It wasn't through the lack of trying though, as they did try hiring Roger Moore. However, Nightfire were successful in acquiring Pierce Brosnan. Well, sort of. Brosnan lent his looks to the character, while the voice was provided by Maxwell Caulfield. He, along with the writers Bruce Furstein, Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo, do a good job in embracing and embodying Bond. The same can be said for M and Q, who are voiced by Samantha Eggar and Greg Berger.
Future me stepping in whilst editing. I found this interview with executive producer John Horsley, in which Brosnan lending his looks was discussed.
When you see Pierce Brosnan in the game, you see Pierce Brosnan. He's the epitome of James Bond, debonair, suave, charismatic. Came out great. And I think he brings a certain authenticity and personality to the character just like he does in the film. So when you see him wink or raise his eyebrow, you're definitely seeing the real McCoy.
Additionally, after Brosnan renewed his contract to play Bond in Die Another Day, which was released just 2 days after Nightfire, with the trailer for that film being in this game, Andrew Bicknell, who provided the look and voice for Agent Underfire, was replaced by Brosnan late in the development. However, the change likely came too late to update the voice as well. Evidence of this can be found in the trailer and gameplay shown off at E3 on the 22nd of May 2002. At that point, the game had been in development for 14 months and had shown off Bicknell's Bond. But then just 3 months later, on the 29th of August, a more familiar version of the game was shown off at ECTS with Pierce Brosnan donning the Bond suit. The difference between the gameplay from May to August of 2002 is night and day. It's almost like a different game, and with E3 being at the time the most prestigious gaming event, in which the very best versions of games were put on show for adoring fans, this highlights how late in the development Brosnan stepped in to lend his looks, and how it's likely they didn't have time for him to re-record the voice lines. Anyway, back to it.
Is it cheesy in places and corny in others? Sure, but that is James Bond, and that is Pierce Brosnan's James Bond. I get that some may not be a huge fan of the one-liners, as it may be deemed as over the top and not realistic, given the situation a real-life spy would be in. But if we are honest with ourselves, nothing is in James Bond, and that adds to the fantasy and charm that this game has in pockets full. In short, if you like James Bond, you will like Nightfire. With this said, Nightfire can be enjoyed by the casual gamer too. It's a fantastic FPS with the occasional high-octane driving experience thrown in the mix. I mentioned of how well the story is executed, and proof of this being in the missions and level design, but adding to the execution is the music. You see, as the days turn into months and months into years, when looking back on games you think fondly of, you'll often find yourself reminiscing over the music accompanied with it. For example, if I was to mention Need for Speed Underground 2, you will think of Riders on the Storm, and for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, you have the iconic multiplayer menu theme. This game is no different. The music is nearly as important to a game as what the gameplay is. You have a good game with good gameplay, but a great game with an accompanied and accomplished music. Music transcends a game from a simulator to an experience, and in this case, a James Bond experience. Whilst being the 21st Bond game since it all started with Shaken But Not Stirred in 1982, Nightfire was the first to feature its very own soundtrack. Nearly civilised by Estero, which created especially for Nightfire, and due to the game's popular demand, it played in millions of homes worldwide, making it for many, including me and my brother, the soundtrack of our childhood. Reminiscent of the films, it even has its own music video that plays when you first start the story. How cool is that? Here it is for a reminder.
Don't love me quietly, do it with intensity. We'll miss the point. With everything you stray, oh, there's no love to be gained. 'Cause we all need a civilized, and I could almost love you more. We will throw this building up just so we can tear it down. Nightfire.
A James Bond game wouldn't be complete though, without featuring the iconic James Bond theme. That one, in case you were wondering. It's had a slight facelift, but the change suits the game. Not only does each mission come with its own song, but specific sections and situations within the missions also have their own song. Some of you may have noticed that I've picked and mixed my favourites into this video. And a game that houses such an impressive array to choose from, it proved harder than I first thought. Adding to the experience are the often overlooked and forgotten about ambient map sounds. For example, when shimmying across an icy ledge and dangling from a wire in both the exchange and chain reaction missions, this intense sound can be heard. It just makes sense that this sound was created for these specific moments. It fits so well. The same applies to when you first get spotted by guards in the 6th mission called Night Shift. If you were seen, as the guard turns to run to the alarm, a frantic scurry of sound is played to highlight this. Also, at the very start of the exchange mission, a howling dog can be heard, which is then followed by a helicopter flying overhead. I still remember as a kid playing this for the first time and being absolutely blown away at the immersion and depth of this game. Even games released today struggle with these intricacies. This speaks volumes to the love and care that the composers Sean Callery and Jeff Timoshook put into separating this from any other game in its genre before or since. Again, it's a James Bond experience.
The split screen days. I'd originally planned on making this documentary just on the multiplayer alone. That's how good it is. For me, it's the best two-player game of the PS2 era. I mean, who can forget Oddjob's hat? Whether there was more luck than skill involved is up for debate, but getting kills with this in the final seconds to win a match against my brother really were the first steps I took into competitive gaming. It's here where the unlockables from the single player that I previously mentioned come into play. There's Bond in a suit, to him in a tux. Oh, you want him in a spacesuit? Yeah, sure, you can have that. One of the most iconic villains in Jaws, to one of the first with Oddjob, to characters in the Brosnan era such as probably the handiest Bond girl in Wei Lin, and the double-crossing Electra King along with a man who doesn't feel pain and hard. It's funny because as a kid I grew up on Bond, but my first taste of some of these iconic characters came in the form of blasting them with a railgun and not on the big screen. Haven't been able to find out how long it took for them to develop the multiplayer, but my guess would be nearly as long as the single player. They definitely didn't slap it together in a hurry, that's for sure. Oh, and there's also a character in here whose name used to make me laugh as a kid. Still does now. If you don't have anyone willing to pick up the second controller, still hours of fun to be had against the boss. I mean, the sniping alone is amazing. It's so satisfying to hit a no-scope or quick-scope even to this day. Also, headset warning. If that doesn't give you nostalgia, then I just feel sorry for you. Sticking to the theme of nostalgic things, the map ravine is definitely that. Getting a cross-map kill with Oddjob's hat hit better than Haribo as a kid. But sadly, it can't be played against bots though. I guess they didn't figure out a way to code the AI over the narrow bridge in the middle. Speaking of bots, it has to be said that you can only have a maximum of 4 on the PS2, whereas on the Xbox and GameCube the limit is 6 and PC is a staggering 12. That aside, just look at how in depth the bot settings are. There's the movement speed, which makes them easier or harder to kill depending on what you pick, the personality, which dictates the likelihood of them looting weapons dotted across the map, aggression, which increases how aggro they are towards you, as well as accuracy and reaction time. This means you can pick how casual or competitive you want the experience to be, which adds to the replayability. You can also adjust your own gameplay by opting whether you want friendly fire enabled, the weapon set, which is just the coolest thing ever, from pistols only to explosions, snipers, it has it all, not just a random option whereby each item has different spawn rates. This leaves the door open to creativity and a lot of fun kills. Professional mode, which is helpful too, because you can choose whether you want to limit the amount of pickups you can carry, location damage, so would shooting Renard from the world is not enough in the foot, inflict the same damage as it would to hit him in his scarred face. Either way, the mate still wouldn't feel it. On this screen, you can choose how near or far you want to respawn to the bots, giving way for even quicker gameplay, choosing whether you want mounted guns on a map, as well as grapples, mini-tanks and helicopters, which act as pocket kill streaks, can all be selected, along with whether you want exploding barrels on a map for an extra kick. On the surface, these changes may seem minimal, but the gameplay is far quicker with these mods selected. Then there's a list of the game modes, which shockingly puts modern Call of Duty to shame. I mean, we even have Demolition and Capture the Flag. King of the Hill and Team King of the Hill are in this, as well as your traditional team deathmatch and free-for-all. And honestly, these modes are fun to play against bots even after all these years. Imagine what they were like with a group of you crammed in front of one TV shouting Screen Watcher after every death. This game isn't just James Bond done right, but it's multiplayer done right. Maps also put Call of Duty to shame, and as with the single player maps, come equipped with their own soundtracks. From researching, there are 14 maps in the PC port, whilst the console edition just has the 8. With this said, they are completely different maps to what the majority of us know and love, but I can't speak on how well they play. As for the console version, Skyrail I would argue is the most iconic, with it being the first map on the list. It's naturally the first map you check out. The 2 mansions either side separated by snowy terrain, which can be avoided through the use of the Skyrail that loops around the map, offers good symmetry and lines of sight, which makes for a balanced experience and really good replayability. Then there's Fort Knox, which actually is from Goldfinger, and it allows for interesting routes with vertical and versatile gunfights. This means close quarters guns such as the Auto 12 shotgun can be just as effective as the covert sniper. The P2K is viable too. Snowblind also offers great close quarters and mid to long distance engagements, which is helped by the grapples if you turn them on. There's just something about a snowy nighttime map, and with it almost being the copy-paste version of the exchange mission from the single player, it makes me love it even more. And then there's Phoenix Base, which is a map you went to if you had a score to settle with your mate to find out who was better. It's essentially James Bond's answer to Rust or Nuketown, long before those ever existed. Just watch out for the spawn trap. Atlantis, from The Spy Who Loved Me, is a solid all-rounder. There's indoors and outdoors sections where the high ground matters just as much as your accuracy and your decision making when it comes to which weapons to pick up. Missile Silo, where the height is even deadlier, and if I'm honest, is the worst map for that reason. It just lacks a balance, but it can still be fun as long as you don't take it too seriously. Subpen is also from The Spy Who Loved Me, but is similar to Fort Knox, whereby it has some elevation, but with plenty of tight corners and entrances, which makes the minimap even more important. To reiterate my thoughts with Ravine, when I think of Nightfire, I do think of the exchange mission along with Snowblind and Ravine, which are the multiplayer equivalent, so not being able to play on that against bots really is disappointing, but even so, it's still the best multiplayer game from that era. I can't touch on the single player and multiplayer segments without mentioning the cheat codes. After all, it wouldn't be a 2000s game without them, and there's loads. If you don't fancy grinding a campaign to get the platinums, you can unlock all characters, maps, game modes, guns and gadgets. And also, perhaps lesser known cheat codes are the driving ones shown on the screen. I had no idea these existed until I fell into the cheat code rabbit hole. From the YouTube videos that exist, you would think these just apply to the mission Enemies Vanquished, but they apply across all missions that see you in a vehicle, regardless of whether you're driving or not. So that's Paris, Alpine Escape, Enemies Vanquished, Deep Descent and Island Infiltration, so 5 out of 12 missions. Just look at the difference in speed in the Paris mission when the speed code is applied. Even though the PS2 controller isn't as responsive as today's controllers, and there isn't a setting to increase the sensitivity, I somehow found it easier to hit the shots when this cheat was active. It forces you to snipe off instinct, which works well in my favour. I mean, I even hit this shot to kill the tyre flat and get the Bond move. Funnily enough, you can use these cheats on Deep Descent even though that results in mission failure as you end up driving too quick through the stealth section. Try it out if you get a chance, but my suggestion would be to turn off motion blur, otherwise you're basically drink driving.
I believe this mission called for stealth, 007.
And it's on Enemies Vanquished where the cheats get even more interesting. This is with 2x boost, motion blur and unlimited rockets. The amount of fun and carnage you can cause is off the scale, but the driving is so sensitive, so take these corners at your peril. After turning off the motion blur so I could actually see, I inputted this code which swaps out the Aston for the SUV. You may recognise this from the Island Infiltration mission later on in the game, and it looks so strange to see it here rather than in the dirt tracks of the jungle. It's only on this mission that this cheat code can be used, but also there is a secret alternative mission you can play instead of Enemies Vanquished. Input this cheat code and it will start this secret race. This Paris loading screen will show before being placed in Dominic's car, which is the same car you rescue her out of in Paris. Race along the same map used in Enemies Vanquished, but without the bad guys to worry about. This was played with the speed boost enabled, and the race ends just before the drop down into the icy part, the section where you have to take out the choppers and vehicles before completing Enemies Vanquished. Upon completion, the game simply moves you on to the next mission of the game. What's crazy is the standard mission without any cheats is actually quicker than the race, but only by using this glitch. If you turn around at the start and glitch your car in this position, you can cut out the whole mission and drive out of bounds straight to the final icy section and complete the mission in around a minute or so. Speedrunners use this glitch and is in pretty much every fast time and world record going. I agree with this comment I came across. Nightfire continues to surprise all these years later. Be really interested to know how well known these cheat codes were back in the day and if any more have been found since. I did spend some time on non-vehicle missions to see if any of these cheat codes work, but sadly they don't. It even resulted to random button bashing in the hopes I would unearth a new cheat code, but it was without success. Actually, with any great game you have fond memories of, a part of you may fantasise over a possible remaster, whilst the other part might be telling you that some things are best left in the past. I might just be describing my own feelings, but you are left wondering what if, after watching this interview with Joel Wade, who is not only the producer of Nightfire, but the 2 Bond games either side, that being The World Is Not Enough and Everything or Nothing.
So one of the real challenges and what makes actually the creating of this art and art form in itself is balancing the technology, what you can do, with what you want to do. So one of the things we do is that we really build these like movie sets. As you pull back, you'll see that there's really nothing sort of behind the curtain, as it were. We just don't build huge sections of the world, we just more allude to it being there. I think the thing I'm most proud of at Nightfire is the incredible richness of the environments. But whenever possible, we really tried to add a little bit of life to the scene, whether it's moving water, snow, beams of sunlight, dust, explosions, smoke, breath coming from people's mouths when it's cold. Those little touches we think really add up. We're just on the cutting edge of what it takes to make an incredible, realistic world, and it's really exciting to continually keep pushing that.
20 years later, producers of today's games aren't really speaking of balancing what you can do with what you want to do, because it's just not as big as a barrier as it used to be. Sure, there's always a ceiling, but the console hardware of today's standard continuously pushes it higher. More memory and better performance power has not only allowed for an exponential growth in the size of the maps, but also the finer details and intricacies within them. Everything that Joel spoke of so passionately is now just a given and expected by gamers. This leaves you wondering what Nightfire would look like today, and led me to ponder on if a remaster would be possible. Sadly, from my research, it comes down to the legality issues of who owns what, as many changes within the development companies have been made after the resounding success of Nightfire. On the 23rd of November 2012, Eurocom, a team of 200, restructured the brand to focus their efforts towards mobile games, due to, in their own words, a steep decline in demand for console games. Due to this, they laid off 150 staff, which amounted to a whopping 75% of the workforce. The demand for mobile games must have been even worse though, as only 13 days later on the 6th of December 2012, Eurocom ceased trading. Information pertaining to Redwood Shores Studios is hazy at best, but from what I can gather, following their success of Dead Space, they rebranded to Visceral Games on the 4th of May 2009 to act as a mission statement for their internal team, as well as reflecting the kind of mature content they aim to produce. They wanted, in the Vice President and General Manager's words, Glenn Schofield, to be less Mickey Mouse and more realistic. There's a theme here. And it continues as 8 years later, Visceral Games were developing a Star Wars game, which was ultimately cancelled with the studio closing on the 17th of October 2017. You know, because you can't get any more realistic than laser swords in space. So much for Mickey Mouse. Due to Visceral Games being owned by EA, many of the staff joined EA Vancouver and EA Montreal, with the remake of Dead Space being released in 2023, proving that even though studios can close, the games can live on with their umbrella companies. So this just leaves EA, the publisher of Nightfire. They unfortunately ended the license to Kill 3 years early in 2006, so they could shift the focus to original IPs to maximise profits and manage the portfolio. Through this, Activision struck a deal with MGM and Eon in the same year. Things didn't go according to plan for them though, as Activision published James Bond games, which included Legends, Bloodstone and Quantum of Solace, were all pulled from Steam, Xbox and PlayStation stores at the very start of 2013. You have to think the $70 million they spent on obtaining the IP was not recouped through these games they took down, which goes to show how much this is a results-based industry. Many speculate the final nail in Activision's coffin was the last entry in the Bond universe, 007 Legends, which released on the 16th of October 2012 and was developed by Eurocom. The critics didn't hold back on the feedback. IGN scored the game a measly 4.5 out of 10, with many given similar. Remember how Eurocom laid off 75% of the staff due to a steep decline in demand for console games? Well, this decision was made only 38 days after they released Legends. Maybe they were banking on it hitting the ground running, but folded due to inability to reach the Nightfire heights that was not only their demise, but also Activision and the James Bond game franchise as we know. Let's say a remaster or remake of Nightfire is legally possible. What about if Brosnan doesn't want to reprise his role in the video gaming format? Would they use AI? Or would that in itself create even more problems? Perhaps they should focus on the hiring of the film version of James Bond before even tackling this issue. Then maybe they could use whoever the new James Bond is going to be, much like how they used Daniel Craig in the remake of GoldenEye in 2010. To briefly touch on the future of Bond games, as of the time of recording, IO Interactive, famous for its Hitman games, acquired the franchise in 2020 and have been developing the new entry ever since, with it launching in a matter of days. IO and James Bond seems a match made in heaven. The Hitman games are very open and fluid in design, with there being multiple different ways of playing the game and many different routes to take within the missions. An attribute I gave to Nightfire, however, on a far bigger scale. My only hope is that they don't sacrifice a good story for gameplay though. Nightfire's story is fairly straightforward, but very fitting for what James Bond is. I hope that isn't lost in the mix of combat. For IO to be legends, have to give it everything or nothing, otherwise they'll be under fire with no time to die. And on that bombshell, this brings an end to my first ever documentary. 160 real-time hours have been put into making this, meaning it took 4.5 minutes to create every second you've just watched. So thank you for making it this far, and consider subscribing to let me know you want more.